Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy, Nerd Mode On, and today I'm going to be doing the next episode of Battlefield News, a video series where I'll be talking about changes and or events within a particular Battlefield title. So without further ado, let's get started. So today we're actually going to be taking a look at the Battlefield 1 Fall Update that went into effect on November 15th of 2016. Ultimately, this was a very significant update for Battlefield 1, and it's the first of many that I'm sure the game will see during its lifespan. So starting things off, let's talk a little bit about the Operations game mode changes that went into effect for 64 players as well as the 40-player player counts. For the 64-player player count, they increased the attacker maximum tickets from 150 to 250. There was an increase for the amount of tickets regained from killing retreating defenders after capturing a sector from 2 to 3. Increased the amount of minimum tickets regained from capturing a sector in 64-player operations from 30 to 50. As well as slightly reduce the time it takes to capture the flags. Now transferring over to the 40-player player count, we also see an increase in attacker maximum tickets to 200 from the original 150. There was also an increase in the amount of tickets regained from killing retreating defenders from capturing a sector from 2 to 3, just like the 64-player count, as well as they also slightly reduced the time it takes to capture the flags. Now moving right along to some conquest changes. Now the Conquest game mode actually hasn't been changed too much from its original value, however we do see an alteration on a specific map in Battlefield 1. This time around the community was very vocal about the Suez map in terms of the imbalancing that the map faced due to the 3 flags that were originally a part of this specific map. With this specific update, we do see the adoption of 2 additional flags on the Suez map, giving it a total of 5 flags in total. DICE has also added 1 armored car for either team to spawn on at their headquarters. DICE has also reduced the size of the capture volumes on the flags located in the villages. Previously, this would have been known as the A and B capture zones. Now this specific change is to reduce the amount of building interiors that were located within the capture area. Ultimately, this should make it a little bit easier for players to find players that are trying to capture the flag, as well as it focuses more enemies onto this smaller zone instead of it having it so large. Now moving right along, we're going to be talking about some other changes that are in specific to some features that have been fixed from the original version of Battlefield 1, as well as some other features that have been implemented due to the community asking for them. So of course, let's kind of talk about some of the additional information that has since been added. You can now customize your soldier from within the UI by selecting either the icon on the home screen or on the soldier. This feature is definitely very welcome, however it is not completely fleshed out. As of the moment, you are still not able to select some of the fine-tuning characteristics of the pilot class as well as your tanker class. I do imagine that these classes will be later added, but as of the moment, you do not have the ability to customize your character within this screen. As of the moment, the only way that you can do it is by obtaining the vehicle and then selecting the customizations that you require. It is worth noting that if you are interested in customizing your vehicle class, of course you do have the option to download the Battlefield application from the mobile store, and of course you do have the ability to customize all of your 4 primary classes as well as any vehicle classes from that specific application. Now alongside this addition, we also get to see the squad leader demotion system returning back from Battlefield 4. This system allows the squad leader to be demoted and a new squad leader to be promoted if a squad leader is ignoring multiple requests from his or her squad mates. Ultimately, this should allow players that want to be squad leaders to have the ability to accumulate the role if a player is not playing the role as they should. So ultimately, this should allow everybody to have a lot more XP at the end of the game, as well as allow you to communicate a little bit better with some of the newer players that are joining the Battlefield series. Now we also see the addition of battle packs being able to be purchased in this current edition of this update. Of course, this is a very controversial topic amongst many players, considering that the price for battle packs as of the moment is a little egregious. However, I do imagine that this system will be reworked in multiple different facets, considering that as of the moment, no matter how well you do in-game, your probability of accumulating a battle pack is no better than somebody that goes 0 and 50. So of course, as of the moment, I do imagine that the system will be slightly reworked from its original value. Many players will rejoice at the sight of the quit button, considering that it is now available at any given time when in the end of round screen. This is definitely a very welcome change, considering that the quit button is essential, especially if you do not wish to exit the game entirely and then relaunch the game, so this should save players a little bit more time when it comes down to getting back to the home screen. Players that are in the prone stance can no longer be pushed by other friendly soldiers. This was very frustrating, especially if you were somebody that was trying to line up a shot if you're a sniper, or ultimately if you were trying to use your AT rocket gun. Sometimes players would bump into you and your body would slide across the ground as if you had been buttered up. However, it is worth noting that it still feels like the prone stance is a little finicky in Battlefield 1. As of the moment, you still have the ability to be slingshotted off of the environment, so as of the moment, I do imagine that it's not completely fixed, but this should reduce some frustrations that players were feeling. There has also been a fix for an issue where a player could spawn in with the wrong kit. Example would be a tanker kit when you were trying to spawn into an airplane. However, it is worth noting that if you're somebody that's trying to spawn into a tank, unfortunately there is still the issue where you could only spawn in as the tanker kit while ultimately not having the vehicle that you were trying to accumulate. Squads are no longer auto-locked if less than 3 players join a server as a party. This was definitely an issue with the launch of Battlefield 1, considering that if you looked at the squad screen, you would see multiple squads that only had 1 or 2 people in them. Of course, many players were making their own squad to try to accumulate as many points as humanly possible. However, this should reduce some of the frustrations that players were feeling. There has also been a fix for squad and team revive colors being switched. This should enable medics the ability to prioritize specifically which players are a little bit more important to pick up, especially if they're in communication with their squad members. Now, transferring right along, we're going to be talking a little bit about some weapon balance. Now, it is worth noting that unfortunately the weapon balance listings are not as extensive as I'm sure many players were expecting, considering that the community has had an uproar in the amount of weapons that they deem to be overpowered. This time around, it seems like we only see some slight improvements from their original values, but ultimately we're really going to be focusing heavily on the light machine guns this time around and not so much about some of the shotguns and submachine guns that the community deems as overpowered. So with that said, light machine guns were less attractive than they had originally hoped. Of course, they've given them various forms of adjustments to make them a lot more viable and a lot more competitive at mid-range combat. Some of the various forms of adjustments are that they have increased the light machine gun and self-loading rifle bullet suppression at medium range, and of course alongside that they have also increased the aimed accuracy of support machine guns. Now last but not least, we also get to see the Hellriegel now overheats a little bit slower and has increased horizontal recoil. Now ultimately, the adjustments that were done to the Hellriegel may not have been as severe as some players were hoping, but I do feel that the weapon is still in a fairly decent spot when it comes down to its competitive nature as well as its balancing characteristics in comparison to the Automatica. Now moving right along, let's talk a little bit about some gadget balances. Starting things off, let's talk a little bit about the controversial mortars, considering that they have definitely seen an increase in their performance from the previous editions of the Battlefield series. Now, considering that mortars have had a balance pass, players now have to pick more clearly between slow, accurate fire or rapid fire that is inaccurate. Mortars now require a time after deploying before they are fully accurate. They have increased the inaccuracy penalty for firing multiple mortar rounds quickly. DICE has reduced the maximum damage radius of support airburst mortars. Mortars will need to land closer to their targets to do the full 65 damage. The minimap targeting function of mortars now shows the current accuracy level of the strike. The red dot will only appear when the strike is at its maximum accuracy. Both support mortars now fire 2 smoke rounds in addition to their default round. A hint has also been enabled to explain this feature to some of the newer players, as well as that this feature is currently present. And last but not least, the HE mortar now correctly has the same range as the airburst mortar. So ultimately, while a lot of these changes to the mortar are very welcome in terms of balancing them out in comparison to some of the newer game modes that have been initiated for Battlefield 1, I do feel that there are some alterations that can still be done to the mortars. I don't feel like they should recharge nearly as quick, considering that they are still very spammable when it comes down to the operations game mode. Now moving right along, let's talk a little bit about some bug fixes. DICE has removed the delay before being able to fire the primary or secondary again after deploying a gadget or throwing a grenade, and they have also made a fix so that only the player who places the mortar can use it. Previously, there was a bug where any player could just randomly mount any mortar and be able to have all of the benefits of using the mortar while still being able to accumulate kills in the process. There was also a bug that if a player jumped onto a mortar that was not being used by the original owner and the owner decided to put down a new mortar at a later date, it would originally kill the player that was utilizing the mortar. So of course, these bug fixes are definitely very welcome in terms of fixing some of the previous issues that may have been plaguing a very minute amount of players, but ultimately this should make it a little bit easier for trying to deploy multiple gadgets as well as not killing your friendly teammates. Now last but not least, we're going to be talking a little bit about some feature updates. Now starting things off, let's talk a little bit about the ricochet mechanic. Just in case you guys are not familiar, in the previous editions of the Battlefield series, the ricochet mechanic was actually not a part of Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, or Battlefield Hardline. This new feature has been mistaken as dusting from those previous games, so of course it was definitely very frustrating if you were somebody that felt like your shots were hitting, but unfortunately you were not granted with any damage XP or ultimately trying to decrease the health of the vehicle. However, DICE has collected some feedback from the community and they have realized that they need to make the ricochet mechanic a little bit easier for players to understand, and ultimately they have added definitely a lot of features to make this feature a little bit more prominent to the player while it is occurring. Tracers that ricochet off armored vehicles are now more easily seen, as well as a hit indicator sound has been added when this does occur on vehicles. Now, of course, we also get to see some alterations done to the fortress guns. They may not be the most notorious thing, especially when it came down to Battlefield 1, considering that originally they were exceedingly weak and they barely did any damage to infantry players. Now, in true DICE fashion, the fortress guns do a lot more damage against vehicles, as well as they are a lot more lethal against infantry units. The fortress guns are exceedingly beneficial at taking out heavy tanks. I mean, they can definitely do a lot of damage, and I highly recommend giving them a try if you guys haven't tried them since the game came out. And last but not least, let's quickly talk a little bit about the AA guns. DICE has decreased the damage of the AA cannons against planes and plane parts, as well as reduced the AA truck range to better align with stationary AA and prevent headquarter camping. But anyway guys, that's really all the information I have for you. Of course, if you guys are interested in checking out the article for yourself, considering that there were a lot of things that I didn't necessarily discuss in full detail, then of course I will leave the article linked in the description of this video. But until the next episode guys, this has been NMO, and I'm going to be signing out guys. Peace!